Hello, and welcome to Step Up Nigeria's podcast. Our podcast is an initiative built to create awareness of governance issues that highlight the cost of corruption and its impact on service delivery. It's also aimed at promoting values that would help to build a society with people of integrity and provide solutions to service delivery challenges faced by everyday Nigerians. Welcome. My name is Feromi Adeola, and I am the host of this podcast. And on our podcast today, we'll be answering the question, how can asset declaration help in the fight against corruption? And to discuss this with me, we have a special guest today in the house who has been on our podcast before. So we'd like to ask you to introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kolawole Oluwadare. I work with the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP. And thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Kola. I was so excited when I got the invitation to attend the event because the topic is one of the things we don't talk enough about in Nigeria. Asset declaration of interest, financial disclosures, things like that. And as your report says, they are becoming anti-corruption tools for anti-corruption agencies and governments to fight corruption around the world. So SERAP recently released the Citizens Guide to Asset Declaration by Public Officers in Nigeria. Can you please share some of the key elements of the guide with us and how asset declaration will help with the fight against corruption in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sharon. The report was put together by SERAP, as you had rightly mentioned, with the active support and sponsorship of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, or SEWA. It's under a project that SERAP is doing with them as part of strengthening the asset declaration systems in Nigeria. And that is why we undertook that report as part of our project activities. The report itself has basically 6 parts. We have the conceptual analysis and overview and the prognosis, and we have the normative framework in Nigeria, which covers basically the legal framework and a bit of history of how that came about, looking at the evolution of Nigeria's government. And we looked at also the challenges to implementation and efficacy of asset declaration systems in Nigeria. We had the whole chapter. That's the 4th chapter dedicated to the comparative global and regional best practice on asset declaration. Add 360 view for the citizen as to what asset declaration is about and to understand how it works, the challenges, and how that citizen can effectively use asset declaration as a tool for advocacy in their own little way. And of course, it also helps those in government, and I refer to public officers, in performing their civic responsibilities in line with the law, to not only disclose their assets, but to do it in a way that it aligns with the law. And what we've seen is that there seems to be not enough understanding of what asset declaration is meant to be. For instance, looking at the fight against corruption in Nigeria and how it has fared and how it has been fought over time, asset declaration is a good tool on the preventive side to combat corruption. And of course, the investigation and the punitive aspects are there as well. But you would agree with me that if asset declaration mechanisms are used effectively and applied effectively by those agencies tasked with that duty, it would prevent corruption to a very great extent. And that is what we've seen, and that is what we set out to publish this report. And it's very interesting that one of the key findings that SERAP was able to make, very instructive in the report, is that the refusal of the Code of Conduct Bureau, the CCB, which is the body statutorily vested with not only getting information about assets from public officers, but also doing verification on those forms, and also publishing those asset declaration forms, the information in them. Their refusal to make available those information to the public, which has been provided amply by the Freedom of Information Act, is a very great setback for the fight for transparency and accountability in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, Kola, for that introduction. So the report also speaks about how Nigeria is bound by international jurisprudence, international law, to like the United Nations, African Union, and ECOWAS treaties to comply with a broad range of anti-corruption measures, which include transparency of assets of public officers. And so the guide, like you've mentioned, has a comparative analysis of regions and global best practices. So what lessons do you think Nigeria can learn from implementing countries?
Okay. The report looks at the various some strategic locations regionally and international community, how asset declaration mechanisms are fair. And in doing that, it looks at the Nigerian practice and our specific context, and it recommends how Nigeria can, in applying our own asset declaration frameworks, learn from these countries. And such countries include countries that we are in the same, call it a political, socio-economic belt. Countries like Bulgaria, like Chile, like India, and gives specific mention to some of the cases that have happened in those countries. And specifically referring to India, for instance, the Supreme Court of India had ruled that a citizen's right to know about public functionaries is derived from the freedom of speech and expression, which, of course, the constitutional guarantees in India as well. And that they must be obeyed in knowing details of asset declaration by such public officers. We also have an analysis of Peru and some of the cases that come out and jurisprudence that come out from that country as well on asset declaration. We also looked at the Philippines and South Africa. At least that gives Nigeria no choice. Yes, we have sister African countries where apply asset declaration systems that work effectively. And so for Nigeria, we've seen that it is not a dearth or lack of framework. It is that will to implement them to the letter. That appears to be the main problem. And that goes to the root of what I mentioned earlier about the CCB, the Code of Conduct Bureau, making information available to the public, which has been clearly provided for in the Constitution. Yet we have the CCB, we're in court with them presently at the moment. I must mention that resisted that provision, implementing that provision to make asset declaration forms and the content and details of such forms available to the public. So that section of the report recommends that Nigeria must not only implement what we have in a legal framework presently, which are constitutional guarantees, by the way, as reinforced by Section 39 of the Constitution about the freedom of expression. That's the freedom of expression, which is to receive and impart, an Article 9 of the African Charter. And so the specific recommendation is Nigeria should implement the laws we have, while we should make these mechanisms that we have more robust and implementable within the context of our democracy in Nigeria.
Thank you again for that contribution and for really the importance of learning from other regions who have implemented such measures. So I was saying, do you think Nigeria's peculiar case has something to do with like cultural values of secrecy and hiding of information? Do you think that plays a role into why asset declaration is being resisted?
Saying that is part of Nigeria's tradition of secrecy presupposes, and I want to believe an assumption, that we have a traditional history of secrecy, or that secrecy or lack of transparency and accountability is a social norm of Africans. I disagree. I disagree very much. And what I've come to see is Africa as what I've come to realize as contemporary traditional social norms. There are social norms that are relatively new, but which some of us think were actually pre-colonial. So without digressing so much into that, I disagree. I think it is the lack of commitment of both the public officers and the followership to take up the challenge that is an hindrance to asset declaration, which is a smaller component as part of that whole legal framework of transparency and accountability. So what will stop a public officer? And by the way, the public officers required by the Constitution under part, I think that's 50 Schedule Part 1 of the Constitution, to declare their assets are not only political office holders, but all public officers, including the local government chairman and pretty much everyone that you can consider to be a civil servant or a public officer. So looked at within that context, it takes on a broader meaning. And you will see that this is not a problem of the political class. It is a problem, it is a challenge of the larger society. But I would refrain from saying it stems from norms or what you call tradition of secrecy. Possibly if there is more advocacy on this point, and there is a better understanding of what this does to our society, we would have more compliance and we would have more pushback by way of advocacy from citizens to make sure that this information are in the public domain.
Okay, thank you. So what other challenges do you think, beyond the current issues, like you said, you're in court in, what else do you think are important challenges that are hindering this from happening? And what recommendations will you give based on those challenges to help improve and quicken asset declaration by public officers?
Yeah, what we've identified as part of the challenges facing implementation of asset declaration by public officers is in Nigeria is, number one, non-compliance by public officials. And the law is clear on this point. That's paragraph 11, sub A and B of the 5th schedule of the Constitution of Nigeria. It's clear that public officers must declare their assets every 4 years, and also upon resumption and after leaving office. But we've had low compliance. And what makes this more of a problem is even the lack of data as to compliance. Since the CCB does not publish information of what he has received or what has even been verified or who has been prosecuted, except for the ones that are sensational, there is no input data to be able to come to that conclusive to backdrop whether we have the compliance, adequate compliance or not. But generally, in the absence of lack of information, there is low compliance by public officers. And lack of transparent follow-up and verification of declared assets by the CCB is also one of the greatest challenges, which is something that has been admitted more so by the CCB themselves. And the law is clear as to what the CCB must do in paragraph 3 of the 3rd schedule, that the CCB is meant not only to collect the forms, but also to verify the information. And that brings the question, even though we have a CCB Act that has been passed that gives teeth to that provision of the Constitution, how functional are those offices in the 36 states of the Federation? How well funded are they? How trained are the staffs? And how do they undertake these things? And so it is natural that we have no information as to how much of these forms have been verified, what has been found to be false, and of course, prosecutions that will flow naturally, and then convictions, either the one way or the other. And so lack of verification is also a problem. And then thirdly, the reluctance of the CCB to publish these records, as I mentioned earlier, for public scrutiny, it's a very big challenge. And that is possibly the biggest challenge to asset declaration systems in Nigeria, which of course was created to be a tool of aiding transparency and accountability. But when that social element, that public participation is absent, that citizens cannot play their roles in what we've come to call a public participation in governance, how well can that system fare? And because citizens don't know, and I can give you an instance to situate it properly in constance. From in your state, for instance, you probably know your public officials, the people working in universities, the vice chancellor, the chancellor, the governor, the minister, the commissioners. And you will know if there are anyone who has any property in your locality. And if you seize or asset declaration forms, you can easily say, no, this he has not disclosed, that he has disclosed. And that disclosing these forms does not in any way impede their privacy. There are details that could be left out, of course. So it does not call for breach of their privacy. But the basic and the simplest of all information should be available. For instance, we have the land registries where the information on who owns what property registered is there. That is not a breach of privacy. And so that is also a problem. And the non-verification of most of these forms also by the body is a problem, like I mentioned earlier. And so these are some of those problems that we have. And again, I must mention, it is not for a lack of law, but non-implementation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the guide was targeted at citizens. So it was to enlighten the citizenry on the findings from your reports. So what role do you think, you've mentioned advocacy already, but what can citizens and media and other CSOs do to play an effective role in lifting the lid on assets declaration in Nigeria?
Civil society, civil society has a very critical role to play. And from mentioning civil society is that organized part of the society at large. That also leaves the citizens their role as part of advocacy and holding government to account in their very different ways. And that brings to mind the Freedom of Information Act, which is a veritable tool for every Nigerian to use, whether being citizens or civil society organizations. The Freedom of Information Act is the legislation that allows all Nigerians to have access to information that is public records in Nigeria, and that is the brunt of SERAP's advocacy over the years, that the CCB should make asset declaration forms public, since the Constitution has made that provision clearly in paragraph 3 C of the third schedule, part 1 of the Constitution, as one of the functions of the Code of Conduct Bureau, to keep the information and to make it available to the public on such terms as laws that the National Assembly could make. And when you look at the sequence, the Constitution was enacted in 1999. The Freedom of Information Act was enacted in 2011. So it stands to reason that the Freedom Act is the law that the National Assembly has in mind, which is why the Freedom of Information Act says all public documents and public records. So the citizens can take up this law and use it actively as an advocacy tool to demand for these public records and to ensure that the CCB does what the law that creates it has said it should do and make it available to citizens. And for the civil society organizations can lead vigorous campaigns and for the use of technology in managing asset declaration. It's one of the recommendations that SERAP had made in our report. But since the CCB does not even disclose details of access, but one can comprehend the sheer volume of asset declaration forms, looking at the provisions of the Constitution of those who should declare their assets. So technology is a good thing to use in this area. And civil society naturally plays these roles of advocating by way of advisory to the government as to what should be done to make governance better. And civil society can also, in their advocacy, keep track of the numbers of identity of officials who are obligated to fulfill their statutory roles by declaring their assets. Generally, advocacy is a tool that civil society can do in this regard. I understand that not all civil society organizations can or is willing to go to court like SERAP and those, but advocacy in various ways, either by advisory, by creating a public discourse, like what we have right now. It's a form of advocacy. To keep these things at the front burner and to engage citizens is something that civil society organizations can do so well.
So thank you very much, Kola. Do you have any other additional comments on the report that you still like to share with us? Anything else you think we didn't touch through this conversation?
Same for recommendations that we've made to the judiciary and to the Attorney General of the Federation. And we believe that the AGF, as the chief law officer of Nigeria, should be able to, for instance, based on the arguments of the CCB, which of course we disagree with, the worst that the AGF can do is to propose an executive bill to amend the flaws that the CCB has pointed out to make sure that the public Nigerian citizens have access to this information contained in asset declaration forms of public offices, and to make sure that the AGF should also make sure that the CCT, with the Code of Conduct Tribunal, effectively carries out its mandate in trying officers who are found complicit. But that again raises another problem. We have only one CCT in Abuja. And when you look at the sheer number of public officers who are meant to declare their assets, that calls the question, which is what we've been asking so far from the CCB. How many forms have been verified? How many have we found out to be false? How many have you prosecuted? But if at all the CCB is really in verifying, the CCT cannot handle the volume of whatever will be the outcome. But since we've not seen any, well, I think that question is up to the CCB to tell us what has happened so far. As we have also made recommendations to the judiciary to be proactive in their interpretations of some of these statutes that will and have come before them, either in their court of first instance or in appellate jurisdictions, to pronounce against these secrecy of these forms. The law is that these laws should be pronounced more in the favor of public interest, which is echoed throughout the Freedom of Information Act, rather as against secrecy or the arguments that people have come to bear, what they call breach of privacy, which of course is not real. That we've also advocated that to the judiciary, and this can be done by simply initiating practice direction that guides the courts and rules of court that makes these cases are fast-tracked and having favorable decisions in the interest of transparency and accountability.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Kola. And thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with us. And we hope that for our listeners who are picking up on the conversation, will do more to get themselves informed of the ongoing proceedings and take up more advocacy, emails, social media, however, to ensure that more discussions like this are happening. So Kola, if you would, can you let our listeners know where they can find the full report to read and how they can follow SERAP's work so far?
Yes, the report can be found on our website. That's www.serap-nigeria.org. And also on our Twitter handles at SERAP Nigeria. Copies of the reports are published on these platforms. And also, we also have hard copies of those in our offices in Lagos and Abuja.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kola, for your time. We hope you have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.